So microphone's on.
Oh,
And
good
it can come
Lord.
down.
Oh, goodness. There, that's good. I brought brochures and stuff too,
Customer.
and magnets. Everybody needs a magnet. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I just feel like it's so booming. Like I've got the power. So thank you for inviting us. And I'm sort of a stand-in for Mariah, who is assistant curator that was supposed to come, but I am glad to be here. It's really, I'm gonna pull you back up over here. That's still, oh, it's not gonna work that way. Sorry. Does this pull out? There, I'll do this. We'll go. Sorry, thanks. I forgot that I can't do that too. So probably many of you have been out to the museum, right? And yes, I know. Yeah, okay. So this is going to be mostly a Cole's Notes recap of what's happening, but just a quick overview of the museum and some really I find some of the people that I'm going to talk about at the end interesting as well. So this picture up here, this is a nice aerial view that was done quite some time ago, and I really like it because you can see just about everything. The last time we had an aerial view was probably, oh goodness, the cabin, none of those things were there. So it's been quite a while. And the statue that you see over here on the right, there was an old oak tree that was behind the school at the museum, and that oak tree was well over 200 years old, and it finally had to come down. So this is the tree, and so chainsaw. Robbins is his last name. Out Palmyra way, anyway, he carved this with his chainsaw out of that oak tree. And so that is Reverend King, and the person beside him is Eliza. And Eliza was one of Reverend King's former slaves that came up here with him. And the little boy, actually, when Reverend King was given Eliza, she had a son, but the son had been sold to someone. So when they were coming up here to Canada, Reverend King purchased Solomon, so Solomon and Eliza could, be wonderful to still have that standing tribute to him and the tree all at the same time. And the bell on the other side, this is a replica of the original bell that still hangs in the church in South Buxton, where the hub of the settlement was. And that church was built in 1848 by those former slaves when they arrived here in freedom. So this bell, the original bell, it was presented by the colored inhabitants of Pittsburgh for the Academy at Raleigh, Canada West. And that is inscribed on this bell. And it's very crooked, just like the original letters are as well. And it's interesting because in 1850 in the United States, there was a lot of turmoil that was happening. There was a fugitive pass, and nobody was safe. And actually, that's when there was a huge influx of Blacks into Canada in 1850 because of this law. So the people in Pittsburgh were very proud of what was happening in Buxton. And so they wanted to emulate that by sending this beautiful bell, because education was very important in the settlement. And so naturally, it would summon people to school and to church. But most importantly, when you knew that another family or another person had arrived in freedom. So when people come to the museum, I really encourage them to ring that bell. And no matter how many times a day I hear it, it still sends chills up and down my spine, I'll tell you. So I would like to do a land acknowledgement. We at the museum have started to do that with all of our meetings and beginning with our presentations, if that's okay. So we acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe. We also recognize settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we as the beneficiaries of the treaty must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Come on, we're going to do this quick. So a quick pulse of the history. So this is Reverend King. Now, the settlement was founded in 1849 by Reverend King, and through, again, a variety of circumstances, he acquired 15 slaves. He married into a slaveholding family. He inherited some. And because of some of the laws in the United States, you could not only to the slave, but to the slave owner. And this really affected him. And so he went back to school, became a minister, and eventually he came to Canada. And his first posting as a minister was to the Presbyterian Church in Toronto. And when when he brought his former slaves with him, they ended up in Ohio. They had a farm in Delta, Ohio. And he basically said to them, if you come with me up to Canada West, this is what will be provided for you. And because Reverend King, even though they were his slaves, he provided opportunities for them while they were still technically enslaved. But anyway, he taught them how to read, how to write, the skills that he knew that they would eventually need once they did reach freedom. So they were very capable of doing those things. But since he said, you can go wherever you want, but come with me and this is what will be provided. And so they did, because there was that bond, if you will, and they trusted him because, so far he has been good to us, so why not follow him? So that's what they did. And so they came to Canada, and it took them a while to really grasp that understanding of freedom. I've been enslaved for so many years, and now I own myself. It was really interesting. So why Canada? Why didn't they stay in Ohio? That was one of the reasons, because they trusted him, but also because the border, it was a porous border, if you will. And because of that 1850 law, again, nobody was safe, but slave catchers would patrol that border, slave catchers, bounty hunters, etc. And the one good thing about the Canadian government at that time, they would when they came to Canada. They weren't warm and welcome and fuzzy, but hey, I'll protect you, so slave catchers were not allowed. And if you were caught, you were fined. Not as, we think of it heavily, but not as probably as harsh as they should have been. And we've only found one case that was in the courts where one slave was successfully taken from Niagara-on-the-Lake back to Kentucky. But that doesn't mean that there were many others that had been captured that did not make the court system, especially Niagara, Buffalo, Windsor, Detroit, because they would be, if you can imagine patrolling those borders, but then you can see and taste freedom. It's just right over there, right over where Barry's sitting, and I can't get to it. So it was really, something for them to, try to grasp. It's like I can taste it. So, yeah. So everybody realized that there was slavery here in Canada. Yes. Yes. Please say yes. You knew there was slavery here. Thank you. That dates back to as early as 1501. And actually, there was 4,200 slaves in Canada between 1671 and 1834. So we had quite a bit of slavery here, even before. So you had a combination of slaves that existed here in Canada, not only Black slaves, you had Indigenous slaves, and you had white indentured servants. So there was quite a bit of a variety of slavery. And when people would come to this area, again, it was, oh yes, I'm proud that we've abolished slavery here in Canada, but I really don't like that idea of having them Black people in my backyard. So that was the gist of it at that time. And it's interesting to note that on King Street, the Daily Planet, the facade has been restored. That's where the SOAR building is now, I think. SOAR. Anyway, in 1850, they were writing articles such as "The Negro is a distinct species of mankind and is far inferior to that of the European. Ne'er shall the two races mix or intermingle." So that was the tone that was here in 1850 when Blacks were coming into the area. Just as an FYI. And when, sorry, now you've got me on another tirade. But when they would have these protest meetings and debates, they would have them at the Royal Exchange Hotel, which was at the corner of, help me, Fifth, and where Sonia Rose Jewelers is. Fifth? Kiggy and Fifth. That used to be the Royal Exchange Hotel. So that used to be the retro suites back in the day, if you will. So that was where everybody came to speak, like Frederick Douglass, who was a very important, one of the most famous abolitionists. He was visiting Chatham and Buxton, and he spoke from there. John Brown, same, spoke from there, spoke in Buxton. So there were quite a few people who traveled through here, but that was the questions along the way, just holler. So Marianne, so these are some of the really cool people to me. Everybody probably has heard about Marianne Shad Carey at some point in your, yeah. So yes, she was not only the first woman, the first Black woman in the United States to own and operate a newspaper called the Provincial Freeman, the first Black woman to go to Howard University, but they would not allow her to write her law degree until she was in her 60s. And she was the first woman to get the rights of women to vote in a federal election. She recruited for the Union Army. She spoke at the National Colored Convention of Freedmen People in Toronto at St. Lawrence Hall, which was a big taboo because it was a very male dominated. And, she was a mover and shaker for that time period. So her newspaper, the Provincial Freeman, it started out in Windsor. It was down Old Sandwich Town, where Mackenzie Hall is, in that area. When it was in Toronto, it was on King Street. Oh, Sugarfoot. What is the number? I've lost the number. But it's on King Street West in Toronto. But it spent most of its time in Chatham. When it was in Chatham, it was across from the Sons of Kent in that little mini mall right there. So her newspaper was there. And actually, when John Brown came to recruit men, he would stay with Marianne and her brother Isaac above the newspaper. And there used to be a BME church, which sat beside the charity block, the newspaper as well. So she was, but I think, and actually they are getting ready to unveil a statue. Did you get that memo? In Windsor, at the University of Windsor, at the Letty Library, the beginning of May, a tribute to Marianne Shad. But I think one of the most unique and amazing things to me she organized a group of women. It was called the Colored Women's Progressive Franchise Organization that enabled Black women to invest their money and buy stocks and bonds so they would not become financially dependent on men. And I'm thinking, whoa. So we're talking, 1860s here, here is this woman, doing things that when you talk, you don't, because again, that women were not supposed to be out doing these things, they were supposed to be at home. So she was one of these leaders back in the day. And so Ed can probably, yeah, so she's we have that gene. So she's our great aunt, actually. So she's feisty. And was Wilson Ruffin Abbott, who was the founder of the Mercantile Company that was in Buxton, which was one of Canada's first mercantile companies in Canada. But anyway, he was born in Toronto, but educated at the Buxton Mission School. And what's really neat about him, he was, again, very involved in a lot of activities, but he became Canada's first Black Canadian doctor. And when he was in Toronto, he was taught, he was followed Dr. Augusta. He was the chief surgeon at the Toronto General Hospital at that time, and they both eventually went over to the Civil War, and they petitioned the government, the U.S. government, for them to be able or allowed to fight, and so he did. So he, you know, he was he was a good friend of Lincoln. So he took, when Lincoln was assassinated, he went back over to the house when they brought his body back and helped tend to him. But he was, you know, so involved with that whole war, the Civil War. Recruiter, he, what else was he? He did a little bit about everything. but he was also one of the founders of the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C., which is now Howard University. He and Martin Delany were the first two Black men that were invited into the White House. There was a levee that was being held, basically a big party, if you will, but they were referred to as levees. And they were in uniform. And when he and Martin walked into the White House, they were ignored by all the other white officers. And it wasn't until Lincoln and Lincoln's son went over, his little boy went over and, you know, embraced them and welcomed them. And they were admonished by Lincoln, you will acknowledge these officers, you know, etc. So when you read the account in some of Abbott's papers, it's just very colorful at that scene. But then he eventually came back to Chatham, and he had an office in the Hutton Block, which was on William Street, where there's a long brick building that has offices in it. What am I doing for time here, Dumpling? Okay, who's in that office? Thank you. That was the Hutton Block, and that's where his doctor's office was. But he was also the first Black coroner in Kent County. He was president of the Medical Association. He was president of the Wilberforce Institute. He was also involved with the president of that as well. So he had his hands in all variety of different little pots. And he is buried in the necropolis in Toronto. But his family eventually all, some of them became doctors and scientists, and his great grands, I should say. So he was very, very colorful man. Come on, who do we have next? Artists. Probably everybody has heard of Artis Shreve-Lane because she spoke at your Rotary. Yes, well, here's Artis. And Artis is in her 90s now, isn't she? 93, I think. Yeah, and so she's just recently moved back to Detroit. But she went to the school, the 1861 school, and just 2-3 doors down. So she spent quite a bit of her life in Buxton. But then when they moved to Chatham, she was living on Wellington Street, across from the Freedmen's, what do you call it? The BME Freedom Park, at that corner, Wellington and Princess. That house, that's where when they moved to Chatham, when she was going to school in Chatham. So her work has been all over, and now, you know, the last thing that she did for Michelle Obama, she did a bust of Sojourner Truth, and it was in the, help me, the visitor center at the Capitol. That's where that was. But she also did one of Harriet Tubman, and that's in President Obama's office, as well as several other paintings and portraits as well. So she, again, was one of those, you know, very nonchalant, non-assuming ladies, women who left here and went back, but never forgot their roots. And I think that's what I admire about a lot of these people. Yeah. And James, come on, James. James Rapier. So James was born in Alabama, and he moved to Canada in 1856. in Sandal, but he was also educated at the Buxton Mission School, but he was the first Black teacher at the school in Buxton, the 1861 school. So got his teaching degree, law degree in Montreal. But when he left, before he became the first congressman in the state of Alabama, he was a newspaper editor. He was also involved in dentistry as well as being a doctor. He, was, it seemed like he had another one of those, you name it, and he did it. But when my husband and I were in Alabama, they were getting ready to do a celebration in honor of Rapier, because his picture is in the state capitol there. And they were wanting to pay tribute to him and all his accomplishments. And I found that very encouraging, because while we were there, we were not allowed to see some of the various documents and some of the repositories there. We knew they had them. We had several documentations saying they were there, but they did not allow us to have them. So I was pleased that they were going to honor him as well. And Lillian Shreve. Do you remember Lillian Shreve? Probably not. Do you remember hearing about Lillian? She lived in the house just before the tracks where Tom Shad used to live. Not that one. Beside where the old hall is, the blue, that's where the family. But anyway, she was born paralyzed from the waist down, and the men in the community would carry her to school. But our grandfathers would always talk about Lillian having so much upper body strength. She could climb fences and ropes and trees better than any boy could, but that didn't deter her. So when she left the Buxton Mission School, she went to the Detroit Normal School, Teachers College, and from there, New York, and became Marcus Garvey's secretary. So Marcus Garvey, for those who don't know, he was born in Jamaica, but became the founder of the NAACP, the National Advancement Association for Colored People. And actually Canada had one, the Canadian Advancement Association for Colored People, which maybe some people are not aware. So that was formed in Canada like 1951 during the National Unity Association, which is another story. There's a lot of stories here in Chatham. And Hattie Rue Hatchet. Hattie Rue. She was, when I look at some of these women that came from the community, they were all very strong-willed and very determined and passionate about what they were doing. Her family escaped from Maryland, but she was very involved in the church. The pianist. She was had several youth organizations within the church for children. She was a poet. Some of her poetry is just amazing. But she wrote the official marching song for the World War I soldiers called The Sacred Spot. And for a while, it was the official marching song. And I know that people are trying to get that reinstated, if you will, as the official marching song for the sacred for her. But her, and I guess because, again, very active with the missionaries, the Sunshine Club. But I think all the people in the community itself were very involved in shaping the success of the community, because they worked together, because there was that sense of community that was instilled in everyone. A lot of the people, when they arrived, they had nothing, and now they own themselves, they own their land. And now we are going to build a community, because there was a lot of opposition. So basically it's like, we're going to, yes, we can do it. We just need those same, resources as everybody else. Just give us a chance. And it was very, very successful. So at its peak, there were close to 2,000 that once lived in Buxton. And then after the war, many returned and sold their farms, but then went back to the United States. So, people who come home on Labor Day weekend, that is still their home, if you will. So our little, hamlet of now a little 120 or 125, it grows to 3,000 plus for those people that come home, because they never forget who they are and their roots and where they've come from. So that's it for me, folks. Questions? That was a quick. What did you know or what did you not know? Yes.
Oh, I got a question. Oh, first of all, thank you. Knowledge.
Quick.
But my question is about Dr. Martin.
Uh-huh.
I had a chance to go to Harper's Ferry for the 100th anniversary.
Oh, okay.
Which was that the forerunner to the
NAACP.
But anyway, they took us over to Charlestown in West Virginia, which is where they found
John Brown.
They showed us the tree where he was hanging with this Chatham Bible.
The what? Sorry?
He called it his Chatham Bible.
His Chatham Bible.
His Chatham Bible.
Oh, because he when he was recruiting, he would carry this Bible around with him. And when he was preaching, well, he recruited from the Baptist church, actually, on King Street, and that pulpit is still there that he would recruit from. And he would have this Bible with him. So, and actually when he came to Buxton, he had that same Bible. So he did, carry it with him, because some people viewed him as, this crazy lunatic, and others, he was a very, he was a leader, but because of what he was trying to do, they're like, what is this crazy man thinking he's gonna do? Break crew, take an arsenal, what the, like, really?
One of the places, I think that was a wonderful trip, but they also took us to, it was supposed to be, if my memory's right, Dr. Delaney was very involved in the Masonic movement, and they took us to what I understood to be where his meeting for his Masonic temple was, that he had been one of the founders for, and they gave us a wonderful lunch there. So I was wondering, in your research, does the Masonic movement play much of a role?
They're doing more research, because there were so many Masons that were involved, like Josiah Henson. He was a Mason. And the first, actually, as I point to you, sorry, our relative, A.D. Shreve, he was the founder of the first Masonic Lodge, Black Masonic Lodge in Buxton. But when you read some of the different documents of some of the people who were involved in the Underground Railroad movement, were Masons. So they're trying to make those connections, again, because of all the different, their methodology, whatever, and their beliefs could be, yeah.
Because they had a big write-up and a big wow about Dr. Martin Delaney and his
Charlestown. Yeah. So they're aware quite a few, abolitionists that were Masons. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Oh, okay. I'm off the hook. Oh, can I say one? This is an FYI, Karen, as I see you from council. Our budget has been cut, as you know. Yes, drastically. So we were under the core funding of the municipality when we amalgamated way back in the day. So now we are receiving, if we get the grant, we're not even guaranteed, because we have to apply like everybody else, $25,000, which that's supposed to sustain us. So, if we can't raise enough money, our doors will have to close eventually, probably within the next year and a half. Yeah, without that funding, which is really, really, too bad. So whether that's going to mean staff or cut hours or whatever, but just as an FYI, so we were quite discouraged to hear that. But anyway, That's a story for another day too. See, there's so many stories here. Thank you for indulging. No, okay, 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 okay.
Just hoping we can get you something to go.
Oh. Okay, so do you want to disconnect me there, Jennifer? Oh, sorry, or just pull it out?
Hold there.
Okay, well, I didn't.
Yeah.
Doors. I didn't want to break it.
No worries. Pretty easy go.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Allison, sorry, I was over there and the computer was over here. So Allison and Karen McDonald have come on to join in, but I apologize, Allison came on a little bit after I left the computer.
No
to
worries.
Stop our
Thank you.
recording.